The Austro-Prussian War or 7 Weeks' War was a war fought in 1866 between the German Confederation under the leadership of the Austrian Empire and its German allies on one side and the Kingdom of Prussia with its German allies and Italy on the other. That resulted in Prussian dominance over the German states. In the Italian unification process, this is called the Third Independence War. The major result of the war was a shift in power among the German states away from Austrian and towards Prussian hegemony, and impetus towards the unification of all of the northern German states in a Kleindeutschland that excluded Austria. It saw the abolition of the German Confederation and its partial replacement by a North German Confederation that excluded Austria and the South German states. The war also resulted in the Italian annexation of the Austrian province of Venetia. Causes. There is, in political geography, no Germany proper to speak of. There are kingdoms and grand duchies, and duchies and principalities, inhabited by Germans, and each separately ruled by an independent sovereign with all the machinery of state. Yet there is a natural undercurrent tending to be a national feeling and toward a union of the Germans into one great nation, ruled by one common head as a national unit. Article from the New York Times published in July 1, 1866. For centuries, Central Europe was split into a few large states and hundreds of tiny entities, each maintaining its independence with the assistance of outside powers, particularly France. Austria, the personal territory of the Habsburg emperors, was traditionally considered the leader of the German states. But Prussia was becoming increasingly powerful and by the late 18th century was ranked as one of the great powers of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire was formally disbanded in 1806 when the political makeup of Central Europe was reorganized by Napoleon, while Prussia and Austria maintained their autonomy. The rest of the German states were drawn into the ambit of the Confederation of the Rhine, which was forced to submit to French influence until the defeat of the French emperor. After the Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815, the German states were once again reorganized into a loose confederation, the German Confederation, under Austrian leadership. In the meantime, partly in reaction to the triumphant French nationalism of Napoleon I and partly as an organic feeling of commonality glorified during the Romantic era, German nationalism became a potent force during this period. The ultimate aim of most German nationalists was the gathering of all Germans under one state. Two ideas of national unity eventually came to the fore. One was of Greater Germany, that would include all German-speaking lands, including and dominated by the multinational Empire of Austria. The other was of Lesser Germany, that would exclude Austria and other southern German states and be dominated by Prussia. The pretext for the conflict was found in the dispute between Prussia and Austria over the administration of Schleswig-Holstein, which the two of them had conquered from Denmark and agreed to jointly occupy at the end of the Second Schleswig War in 1864. When Austria brought the dispute before the German Diet and also decided to convene the Diet of Holstein, Prussia declared that the Gastein Convention had thereby been nullified and invaded Holstein. When the German Diet responded by voting for a partial mobilization against Prussia, Bismarck claimed that the German Confederation was ended. Crown Prince Frederick was the only member of the Prussian Crown Council to uphold the rights of the Duke of Augustenburg and oppose the idea of a war with Austria, which he described as fratricide, although he supported unification and the restoration of the medieval empire. Fritz could not accept that war was the right way to unite Germany. Bismarck. There are many interpretations of Otto von Bismarck's behavior prior to the Austrian-Prussian War, which concentrate mainly on whether the Iron Chancellor had a master plan that resulted in this war, the North German Confederation and the unification of Germany. Bismarck maintained that he orchestrated the conflict in order to bring about the North German Confederation, the Franco-Prussian War and the eventual unification of Germany. However, historians such as A. J. P. Taylor disputed this interpretation and believed that Bismarck did not have a master plan, but rather was an opportunist who took advantage of the favorable situations that presented themselves. Taylor thinks Bismarck manipulated events into the most beneficial solution possible for Prussia. Possible evidence can be found in Bismarck's orchestration of the Austrian alliance during the Second Schleswig War against Denmark, which can be seen as his diplomatic masterstroke. Taylor also believes that the alliance was a test for Austria rather than a trap, and that the goal was not war with Austria, contradicting what Bismarck later gave in his memoirs as his main reason for establishing the alliance. It was in the Prussian interest to gain an alliance with Austria to defeat Denmark and settle the issue of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The alliance can be regarded as an aid to Prussian expansion, rather than a provocation of war against Austria. Many historians believe that Bismarck was simply a Prussian expansionist, rather than a German nationalist, who sought the unification of Germany. It was at the Gastein Convention that the Austrian alliance was set up to lure Austria into war. Bismarck made an alliance with Italy, committing it to the war if Prussia entered one against Austria within 3 months, which was an obvious incentive for Bismarck to go to war with Austria within 3 months to divert Austrian strength away from Prussia. The timing of the declaration was perfect, because all other European powers were either bound by alliances that forbade them from entering the conflict, or had domestic problems that had priority. Britain had no stake economically or politically in war between Prussia and Austria. Russia was unlikely to enter on the side of Austria, due to ill will over Austrian support of the anti-Russian alliance during the Crimean War, and Prussia had stood by Russia during the January uprising in Poland, whereas Austria had not. France was also unlikely to enter on the side of Austria, because Bismarck and Napoleon III met in Biarritz and allegedly discussed whether or not France would intervene in a potential Austro-Prussian war. The details of the discussion are unknown, but many historians think Bismarck was guaranteed French neutrality in the event of a war. Italy was already allied with Prussia, which meant that Austria would be fighting both with no major allies of its own. Bismarck was aware of his numerical superiority, but still, he was not prepared to advise it immediately, even though he gave a favorable account of the international situation. When the Prussian victory became clear, France attempted to extract territorial concessions in the Palatinate and Luxembourg. In his speech to the Reichstag on 2 May 1871, Bismarck said, "It is known that even on 6 August 1866, I was in the position to observe the French ambassador make his appearance to see me in order, to put it succinctly, to present an ultimatum, to relinquish Mainz, or to expect an immediate declaration of war. Naturally I was not doubtful of the answer for a second. I answered him, 'Good, then it's war.' He traveled to Paris with this answer. A few days after, one in Paris thought differently, and I was given to understand that this instruction had been torn from Emperor Napoleon during an illness. The further attempts in relation to Luxembourg are known. Unpopular rulers sought foreign war as a way to gain popularity and unite the feuding political factions. In Prussia, King William I was deadlocked with the Liberal Parliament in Berlin. In Italy, King Victor Emmanuel II faced increasing demands for reform from the left. In Austria, Emperor Franz Joseph saw the need to reduce growing ethnic strife by uniting the several nationalities against a foreign enemy. Military factors. Bismarck may well have been encouraged to go to war by the advantages of the Prussian army against the Austrian Empire. Taylor wrote that Bismarck was reluctant for war as it deprived him of control and left the decisions to the generals whose ability he distrusted. Taylor suggested that Bismarck was hoping to force Austrian leaders into concessions in Germany, rather than provoke war. The truth may be more complicated than simply that Bismarck, who famously said that politics is the art of the possible, initially sought war with Austria or was initially against the idea of going to war with Austria. Rival military systems. In 1862, von Roon had implemented several army reforms that ensured that all Prussian citizens were liable to conscription. Before this date, the size of the army had been fixed by earlier laws that had not taken population growth into account, making conscription inequitable and unpopular for this reason. While some Prussian men remained in the army or the reserves until they were 40 years old, about 1 man in 3 was assigned minimal service in the Landwehr, the Home Guard. Introducing universal conscription for 3 years increased the size of the active duty army and provided Prussia with a reserve army equal in size to that which Moltke deployed against Austria. Had France under Napoleon III attempted to intervene against the Prussians, they could have faced him with equal or superior numbers of troops. Prussian conscript service was one of continuous training and drilling, in contrast to the Austrian army, where some commanders routinely dismissed infantry conscripts to their homes on permanent leave, soon after their induction into the army, retaining only a cadre of long-term soldiers for formal parades and routine duties. Austrian conscripts had to be trained almost from scratch when they were recalled to their units on the outbreak of war. The Prussian army was better trained and disciplined than the Austrian army, particularly in the infantry, while Austrian cavalry and artillery were as well trained as their Prussian counterparts, with Austria possessing 2 elite divisions of heavy cavalry. Weapons and tactics had advanced since the Napoleonic Wars and cavalry charges have been rendered obsolete. Speed of mobilization. The Prussian army was locally based, organized in Kreise, each containing a corps headquarters and its component units. Most reservists lived close to their regimental depots and could be swiftly mobilized. Austrian policy was to ensure that units were stationed far from home to prevent them from taking part in separatist revolts. Conscripts on leave or reservists recalled to their units during mobilization faced a journey that might take weeks before they could report to their units, making the Austrian mobilization much slower than that of the Prussian army. Speed of concentration. The railway system of Prussia was more extensively developed than that within Austria. Railways made it possible to supply larger numbers of troops than hitherto and allowed the rapid movement of troops within friendly territory. The better Prussian rail network allowed the Prussian army to concentrate more rapidly than the Austrians. Von Moltke, reviewing his plans to von Roon, stated, "We have the inestimable advantage of being able to carry our field army of 285,000 men over 5 railway lines and of virtually concentrating them in 25 days. Austria has only 1 railway line and it will take her 45 days to assemble 200,000 men." Von Moltke had also said earlier, "Nothing could be more welcome to us than to have now the war that we must have." The Austrian army under Ludwig von Benedek in Bohemia might previously have been expected to enjoy the advantage of the central position, by being able to concentrate on successive attacking armies strung out along the frontier, but the quicker Prussian concentration nullified this advantage. By the time the Austrians were fully assembled, they would be unable to concentrate against one Prussian army without having the other 2 instantly attack their flank and rear, threatening their lines of communication. Armaments and tactics. Prussian infantry were equipped with the Dracer needle gun, a bolt-action rifle capable of far more rapid fire than the muzzle-loading Lorenz rifles of the Austrian army. In the Franco-Austrian War of 1859, French troops had taken advantage of the fact that the rifles of the time fired high if sighted for long range. By rapidly closing the range, French troops could come to close quarters without sustaining too many casualties from the Austrian infantry. After the war, the Austrians had adopted the same methods, which they termed the Stoss tactic. Although they had some warnings of the Prussian weapon, they ignored these and retained Stoss tactic. The Austrian artillery had breech-loading rifled guns, while the Prussian army retained many muzzle-loading smoothbore cannon. New Krupp breech-loading cannons were only slowly being introduced, but the shortcomings of the Austrian army prevented the artillery from being decisive. Prussia could equip its armies with breech-loading rifles and later with new Krupp breech-loading artillery, but the Austrian economy was suffering from the effects of the Hungarian Revolution of 1848 and the Second Italian War of Independence. Austria had only one bank, the Kreditanstalt, and the state was heavily in debt. Christopher Clark wrote that there is little to suggest that Prussia had an overwhelming economic and industrial advantage over Austria, and wrote that a larger portion of the Prussian population was engaged in agriculture than in the Austrian population, and that Austrian industry could produce the most sophisticated weapons in the war. The Austro-Prussian War ended quickly and was fought mainly with existing weapons and munitions, which reduced the influence of economic and industrial power relative to politics and military culture alliances. Prior to the outbreak of hostilities, both the Austrian and Prussian governments sought to rally allies in Germany. On June 15, Bismarck offered territorial compensation in the Grand Duchy of Hesse to the electorate of Hesse if Elector Frederick William were to ally with Prussia. The proposition grievously offended Frederick William's legitimist sensibilities, and the monarch joined the Austrians. Despite the Hessian Landtag voting for neutrality, King George V of Hanover during the spring of 1866 was contacted by Emperor Francis Joseph about establishing a coalition against the Prussians. The Hanoverian monarch concluded that his kingdom would fall if it were to fight against the Prussian armies. Most of the German states sided with Austria against Prussia, even though Austria had declared war. Those that sided with Austria included the kingdoms of Saxony, Bavaria, Württemberg, and Hanover. Southern states such as Baden, Hesse-Kassel, Hesse-Darmstadt, and Nassau also joined with Austria. Many of the German princes allied with the Habsburgs, principally out of defending their thrones. Some of the northern German states joined Prussia, in particular Oldenburg, Mecklenburg-Schwerin, Mecklenburg-Strelitz, and Brunswick. The Kingdom of Italy participated in the war with Prussia, because Austria held Venetia and other smaller territories wanted by Italy to complete the process of Italian unification. In return for Italian aid against Austria, Bismarck agreed not to make a separate peace until Italy had obtained Venetia. Notably, the other foreign powers abstained from this war. French Emperor Napoleon III, who expected a Prussian defeat, chose to remain out of the war to strengthen his negotiating position for territory along the Rhine, while the Russian Empire still bore a grudge against Austria from the Crimean War.